Oh, well, we'll tell you about that. Anybody got anything that they want to make sure that we talk about tonight? All right. So we're going to go through then. We'll go through my agenda and then stop and ask questions and point out other topics or any other questions that you or any other thoughts that you have along the way. We can kind of go there. I'll talk about some of the basics, and I'm going to go through a little bit around how do we put together a team. We said last week, we talked about interventions last week, and what's that like, and what can you do if your loved one is unwilling to get help, right? That was a topic that came up last week. And I don't know how many people here can relate to that, but that's relatively common, right? People have this issue, but they don't see they have this issue. And it's one of the most, or let me rephrase that. I think that when we're in active addiction and we're doing our thing, I think we know that we're struggling. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't really truly met anybody that I would describe as being in actual denial. Denial in the classic sense means what? I don't think it's a problem. I don't have a problem. This is no big deal. What are you talking about? Everybody drinks a case of beer and, eats 24 Percocet. What's the big deal? That's denial. There are very few people who are actually in denial. There are a lot of people, however, that know they have a problem and don't want to do anything about it. Do you see how those are two different things? One is literally this Freudian defense mechanism meant to describe, I cannot perceive that there's a problem with my behavior. I literally don't see it. The second is I see it, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I would argue that probably most of your people are in the second category. If you're here, it's probably escalated to a point where a person knows what's up. There are certain situations, though, that are more likely to fall into denial, like college students, for example. It's very easy for a college student to say this is no big deal. Why? Because everybody's getting hammered, and it's easy to look around and say this is normal. As you get older, it gets harder and harder, right? Nobody wants to be the 50-year-old dude hanging out at the club, right? Nobody wants to be that guy. So the social setting has something to do with people being able to take a look at what they have going on. And then, of course, consequences and things that start to happen. If you start to get DUIs, if you overdose, you start to have these experiences where it's harder to say that it's not a problem. But I will talk a little bit about what to do if you feel like the person is absolutely unaware. Does anyone want to share anything about that? Does anyone have any follow-up questions to that particular part of the process? Yes.
It's my first time here.
Yep.
My wife will be here. My stepson has been just on marijuana for 3 years, and he's kind of in that denial stage.
Yeah.
Bring that up, and I have my opinion about how to deal with it, and she has her opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't think she wants to confront it, so that's kind of why we're here.
That's a great question. That's a fantastic. I don't know if you guys could hear it. It's this idea of, especially with parents having two different takes on what's going on or how serious it is. Now, the first thing is understand how normal that is. That is very, very normal for people to view these issues in different ways. It's very normal for mom to look at it different than dad for all kinds of different reasons. Just difference between moms and dads, difference between maybe your experience growing up versus the other person's experience growing up. So that is not unusual at all. The question becomes, what do we think is the best thing for the child, for the person, and can we come to some kind of an agreement? Maybe we have to both move a little bit on how we're going to approach this. And I'll talk a little bit about what happens to the brain and how a person moves over from just partying, recreational use into something more than that. I'll explain all that. But I will tell you that hands down, the hardest topic and the hardest subject is marijuana. In terms of denial, in terms of it being an issue, the hardest conversation for any drug and alcohol counselor on the face of the planet is like a 16-year-old adolescent male pot smoker. It's nearly impossible to get that person to recognize that this could be an issue. And why is that? Why is that? Anybody got any theories or ideas on why that would be? Yes.
Well, it's becoming very acceptable from a social standpoint.
So the first thing is we have to acknowledge that it's not as dangerous as other substances. It's dangerous. There's nothing safe about marijuana, just like there's nothing safe about chainsaws, right? The idea that marijuana is safe is just not an accurate way for people to say it. It's safer though than other substances. So it's very easy for a person using it to look at other situations and go, look, I'm not taking a chance with my life, or I'm not getting drunk and getting in a fight downtown and all these other things that go on with alcohol, but it's not safe. And so I think that that's one thing. The second thing is this whole push and proliferation of medical marijuana. That terminology is highly problematic. I would prefer people just talk about legalizing it, and I can get down with the debate on legalizing it, but medical marijuana implies what? Not only is it safe, it's actually good for you. Medical marijuana will help your hair grow back. It'll help your foot feel better. It'll help you sleep at night. It'll increase the value of your assets in the stock market. Medical marijuana does everything. Yes.
My son always said, well, you can't overdose on pot.
Yeah, you can't. I tried. That was a joke. I didn't mean I tried recently. This was back in the day, back when I was at Woodstock and stuff like that. No, so no, you can't, and you can't. There's part of this you just simply can't argue with. And if you're dealing with somebody where marijuana is the drug of choice, you can't. You don't want to go there, and you don't want to turn it into this reefer madness kind of conversation. Like back in the 50s when they produced that video that they put out to try to get kids not to smoke marijuana, it actually created more problems than it was worth. It over dramatized what happens when you smoke weed. It literally had people running and jumping out of windows, and it implied that people sexually assaulted people whenever they were smoking marijuana. It was just this idea that marijuana was this, it turns you into this raging maniac. And you can't take that route because that's not the case. But at the same time, you don't have to endorse this idea that it's safe and it's okay and it's no big deal. Again, I'll talk through what happens when a person moves into what used to be called dependency. It's now called substance use disorder severe. And it can happen with marijuana. That's the other part. We have to understand that there is such a thing as becoming addicted to cannabis. And cannabis use disorder severe is real. And there is a withdrawal syndrome. It's not a withdrawal syndrome that occurs like with opioids or anything like that. But irritability, inability to sleep, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, those type of symptoms tend to be present when somebody's chronically smoking marijuana. But we'll talk about that. That's a good example of a very common area that people will push back on. And the strategy becomes, how do we address this? Whether it's mom, dad, friends, whatever it might be, husband, wife, how do we address the use in a way that the person hears us, where we convey that this is not okay, but at the same time, we don't blow it out of the water? Because what'll happen? They'll write you off. They'll be like, they'll go underground with it and not talk about it at all. And so you have to be careful. You can get the opposite of what you want to have happen. All right. Now, if you're out there in Facebook land, send in your questions. Elizabeth is here in the audience, and she will get your questions to me if you have anything out there that you want to talk about.
Rich, is it possible based on the fact that there's some mental illness involved, for them to believe both, that at times they do have a problem and then at other times they're in denial?
Yeah, and I think, let me see if I have, let me pull up I'll talk you through this. So it's really, think about any change. Let's get substances off the table. Think about any change that y'all have tried to go through. It is exceedingly common for the pendulum to swing back and forth when you're first coming to grips on whether or not you want to change with your substance use. Whether you have a mental health issue or not, it's very common to go back and forth. Remember, that isn't, I'm not saying that they go back and forth on whether they have a problem. They go back and forth on whether they want to change. Now, it may come out as, I don't have a problem, because if I don't have a problem, I don't have to change. Do you follow me? It's very rare, though, to run into somebody who doesn't understand that this isn't working, that they have a problem. They just don't think that the solution is, let me quit. I have a problem, but the solution is what? Let me cut back. I have a problem, but the solution is I just need to get my mental health taken care of, and then this problem will go away. So I think people can accept that part, but what they can't accept is I'm going to stop now. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe there's something in your life that you've tried to stop or you've thought about changing, and you've gone back and forth and you've been successful. You've gone one step forward, two steps back. That's how the change process works. That's how we get better from anything, or we make any kind of change in our life. Think about your last New Year's resolution. Did some of you didn't even make it 24 hours, right? Like, so, and it's, at times you were upset about it. Man, I really wish other times like, well, I didn't really want to do that anyway. That's not where I'm at with it. That's how human beings work. The problem is when you mix substances in, right? When you start throwing whatever these chemicals are into the process, it makes it much more difficult to negotiate it, to think it through. And also it gets you to a point where you're so into the substance that it pushes you toward the I'm not going to quit end of it. You guys get that? Because it's an important thing to understand that what we were told as a society for a lot of years was Rich is in denial. And in order for him to get better, we have to break through denial. And the only way to break through denial is what? Rich has to hit bottom and experience enough consequences that he realizes that he has these problems, and then he'll get better. He'll go to rehab, come back, and live happily ever after. That's a myth, guys. That's not how it works in the real world. That's for TV shows. That's for movies. That's not how it is. What happens is most of us go through 5, 6, 3, 4, whatever it is, different tries at managing our substance use. And it usually starts with, I'm going to cut back. If you want to be honest, very few people wake up one day and that's it, I'm done. I'm not using anything ever again. I'm going to cut back, or what? I'm going to get rid of the heavy stuff. I'll get rid of the heavy stuff and I'll use these other things, or I'll quit for a while and I'll come back online and do it later. That's typically the process. And then maybe try to quit altogether, but not be able to follow through on it. And you slip up and then you go through some stuff and you get back on track and you try again. And again, what I would say is that's the way it is with everything, guys. It's just where substance use is considered, because of the stigma and because of the way we've treated people in this country who deal with addiction. It's just, we are not allowed to go through that change process. And now understand, I'm not talking about how family members should act. Family members, you have no professional responsibility in this. Do you get this? Like, your job is to get pissed. So some of you are like doing it really well, right? So as a dad, my response might be different than as a professional. But as a professional, we need to understand that this is par for the course, man. And I need to make sure that you guys understand this. I told this story. I might have told it last week. I've been talking a lot, doing a lot of speeches and stuff. So I'm not sure if I talked about it in here, but last February, I had bronchitis. I got really bad bronchitis. I couldn't talk at all. I had all this stuff going on. I don't know if anybody was coming then. My voice goes away. It went away for a long time. Then I went to my doctor, and he wanted to put me in the hospital for pneumonia. And I said, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to the hospital for pneumonia. And he said, okay, but you got to take some days off of work and just go straight home. And I'm like, yes, sir. Well, I get to the parking lot and I call my wife and I tell her what's going on. And she gives me a speech. Now my family is mad at me, right? Because I'm not taking care of myself. And she's like, you're going to go straight home. And I'm like, well, I got to go to the office for a minute. Okay. No, you go straight home. Well, I got to go to the office for a minute. You follow what I'm saying? I did not follow my doctor's directions. I got in the car. I came here, did some stuff. Then I went home. My point being, that's how people act whenever they're given instructions by people. We don't do right. How many people take what are you supposed to take antibiotics the whole way through? Some of you might quit a little early, right? How many people have been told their blood pressure is a little bit high and maybe you should change your diet, and you might not have followed through on that completely yet either. So this is exactly what the experience is with substances. It's just that substances are so intense, and the behaviors that people get into when they're on drugs and when they're drinking too much, it's dangerous and it's scared. And that makes it very hard for family members to say, well, it's just it's just part of the process. So I'm not encouraging you to give anybody a free pass, not by any means. I'm not encouraging you not to hold people accountable and stuff, but I want you to understand the reality of what you're dealing with. 1 step forward, 2 steps back is the norm. Yes.
Can you talk about that whole enabling and rock bottom thing? I kind of got into a loud discussion Sunday about this.
Well, there is no such thing as rock bottom. It's not a real thing. It was literally a slogan. It's a slogan that was used just to try to help people, man. It was just a thing to say when people were dealing with this. And so this idea was, you got to wait till the person hits bottom. You can't do anything about it, Mrs. Jones. You got to wait till Rich hits bottom. So do some people have to go through a lot of stuff before they make a decision to change? Yes. But I would argue even with them, that doesn't necessarily mean that was their bottom. Like, I got better on my way up. It had nothing to do with hitting bottom. It actually had to do with me seeing some light at the end of the tunnel and figuring out, wow, there's another way to do life. The idea of hitting bottom, first of all, is just, it's mythical, and it is not a real, actual, psychologically valid principle. You get that part. The second thing is, it's incredibly inhumane and just absolutely mean from a professional standpoint. Again, from a family standpoint, you have to do what you have to do. And I would argue that it's not about hitting bottom. It's about boundaries so that you're safe and you're healthy. So it's not about trying to make a person hit bottom. It's about trying to make sure that you're okay. But for the professional world or the healthcare world or people who are trying to help, to say things like a person has to hit bottom, I want you to think about that logically. So on one hand, we're going to say that it's a disease. We're all going to, like, people are going to sit around, Americans are going to sit around, and politicians are going to talk about, we think it's a disease. And then we're going to say, we got to wait till they hit bottom before we do anything. So it's like Carolyn has stage 1 cancer. We're not going to do anything until it hits stage 5. So what we would say is that you can start having conversations with people well before they hit bottom. And you can start trying to encourage people to make changes well before they hit bottom. People who argue against that just really aren't willing to take a look at, like, what's going on in the world. It's more their personal opinion.
Well, this person said that if I would quit helping her or talking to her, then she would hit rock bottom and be okay.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard anybody say.
Oh, I hope you did
It's just not a good thing to say. You hear the statement? The statement was, if you quit talking to her and quit doing anything. Now, I'll qualify that with, I've heard people in families say that to each other. And I think that's more about the emotional feelings that they have about watching the loved one destroy the other person. Do you get that? So I've heard, like, a brother say that to their mom about their sister. So stop doing that, Mom. That's not even because they actually think that. That's just because they're tired of seeing you get destroyed. You see, that's 2 different things. But if a person sits down and they mindfully say something like that, that's an awful thing to say. Here's what I say. There are absolutely cases where you should step off, but it's more about what do you need than what it's going to do to the person. It's this idea of, I need to separate myself right now. I can't take these phone calls. I cannot continue to meet you for lunch because every time I leave, I'm heartbroken. But that has nothing to do with whether or not she's going to get better or she's going to get worse. Now, you can do things, guys, that are obviously going to make it easy for the person to continue to use. What would be examples of things that would make it easier for the person to continue to use? This is very straightforward stuff. It would be what?
Give them money.
Give them money. Give them money, pay the rent, let them live in the house. Like, those type of things make it easier for the person to continue the use. And maybe in those situations, I could see a person saying, hey, Carolyn, stop that. That doesn't make any sense. Quit paying their rent if they're going to continue to use it on crack or whatever. That's totally different than stop talking to her.
Yeah, because we're not doing any of those
Two different things. One is directly related to the person's ability to what? Go buy drugs. The other is just being kind and with a person. Why would you cut off contact altogether? That's typically because it's so emotional for you to see the person or stay in contact. You get so upset. Man, I got on a rip right from the jump. I just talked for 20 minutes without even introducing myself and doing all the normal stuff. Okay, so there's a sign-in sheet going around. If you guys can give us your name, email, that kind of thing, we'll stay in contact with you. This is who I am professionally. If you haven't been here, so I'm a therapist. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I've worked in a bunch of different settings. I've run rehabs. I've run community mental health centers, outpatient clinics. I've done a lot of interventions. Pretty much anything in the behavioral health, mental health field I've been involved in. I've been at Favor for 6 years, going on 7. Favor's a little bit of a different angle. Our deal is first of all, we provide free coaching services rather than clinical counseling services. And that's for a lot of different reasons. It's a good price. Everyone can afford it usually. But the second part is it gets rid of all the red tape. And the truth is the second part is just as important as the first part. If we don't have to take your insurance information, if we don't have to diagnose you and qualify you for services, you could just come in here and just check things out and start to get some information. And what we know is this is a very hard topic. And so for parents to be able to come in and spouses to be able to come in and just put their foot in the water and see what they think and see if this works for them, that's why the services are free, just as much as they're affordable. And again, this is family group. We're going to do this. Tonight will be a lecture. Next week, next Monday, and the following Monday, I will not be here. It'll be an open share. It'll be a discussion group, like circled up chairs, kumbaya kind of stuff going down, sharing with each other. So come check that out. It'll be a little bit different next week. Tonight is not meant to be therapy. It's meant to be education and information. So, but it's hard for me not to throw my knowledge in there and talk about what I know. So I'll bring up some principles around therapy, that kind of thing, but it's not meant to replace anything you're doing. So what else benefits family members? Certainly going to Al-Anon, going to other family groups benefits family members. Seeing a therapist benefits family members. Having someone to talk to, no matter what it is, coach, sponsor, therapist that you can talk to one-on-one. I think that's a hugely important part of this process. So this is only one part of a package of things that you can do to take care of yourself. And what we're talking about, guys, is this is really, especially when you talk about marijuana. So we asked a question about marijuana earlier. This is really what we struggle with. You got about, and this includes tobacco, this includes nicotine. 15.9% of Americans 12 and older will fall into this category of addiction. Interestingly, addiction is not a medical term. It's substance use disorder severe. You'll never see the word addiction really in the medical literature. So whatever the substance is goes at the beginning: alcohol, cannabis, benzodiazepines, whatever it may be. And you see first of all, you have people, this non-current use means basically they've used occasionally, but they're not using on anything that looks like a regular basis. This is kind of the person who drinks every once in a while, maybe at Christmas or something. Non-risky use is just typical social use. Not everybody who drinks has a problem. Not everybody who smokes marijuana has a problem. The next area is where it gets tricky. Risky use. So risky use is dangerous. Risky use is dangerous whether or not the person's brain has changed and they shifted into addiction. So what would be examples of risky use where someone may not be in addiction? We've talked about marijuana already, but go to any college campus on a Friday night, and you're going to see people who are drinking way too much, and terrible things could happen as a direct result of their drinking. But it doesn't mean that they're addicted. You get that difference? And so when you start talking about something like marijuana, this is where here's a way of thinking about it. You can be using something in a risky manner, or you can be using something that pushed you at risk, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you're addicted. And maybe the conversation is more about safety, period, than anything to do with addiction. Do you get the difference? It's not about you're addicted to marijuana. It's if you continue to do this, here are some risk factors. So you'll see that that's one of the ways people try to get around the great marijuana debate, because you're never going to win the great marijuana debate. I just want you to know that. I've tried. And understand that a lot of times with kids, like they don't even think marijuana is a drug. Like, honestly, I've had situations where people have come in to see me where I've said things like, do you use drugs? What kind of drugs are you using and stuff? And they said, no, I just drink a little bit here and there. And then later on, they'll talk about marijuana, and I'll be like, well, you said you didn't use drugs. And they would say, it's not a drug. what are the drugs, guys? What are drugs in the kids' world? What are the drugs? Cocaine, heroin, pills, right? There's this list of things that are actual drugs, and then there's marijuana. So, but marijuana can be risky use. And then you have the guys who cross the line into addiction. Any questions about that chart? And also, if you're out there in Facebook land, get questions. Any questions yet, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we just got one. As a grandparent, what can
Wait, where are they from? Say their name and where they're from.
It's Lynn Farquist. I don't know where.
Oh, I know where she's from. She's almost from Canada. I spoke up there. Hi, Lynn.
She says, as a grandparent, what can I tell my teen grandchild who has pretty much given up their mom who has been using for years?
Wow.
Disappointing them with repeated relapses. Should I encourage them to encourage her, even though they detach to keep from hurting?
So fantastic question. So, and let's take the let's for sake of argument, take the grandkid part out of it. What do you do with repeated relapses? What do you do whenever you get your hopes up? And of course, kids get their hopes up for their parents to get it together. But parents also get their hopes up for kids to get it together, right? What kind of advice would the group have? I'll weigh in on this too, but what kind of advice do you have for anybody who's going through that? This is I gotta tell you, like as a therapist, this is the hardest thing, guys, because it breaks my heart to talk to people, you know, everything's going okay, right? And then boom. And it's so heartbreaking for the family. Does anybody have any experiences or anything that they would share on how to support a person through that? Or anything that's worked for them? So the first thing is what? Understand what it is. So if you're dealing with kids, for example, if Lynn's dealing with kids, grandkids. So the idea is these grandkids need to know exactly what this is called and exactly what it is. And it isn't making an excuse for the person who's using, but it is a brain disorder and it does not involve rational thinking. And the one thing that I would have used that would have done a world of good for me when I was a kid and my father was doing this would have been an understanding that there was something wrong with his brain. You get it? Like that this isn't that they're choosing this or that they hate, that they're angry at the kids or it's because of the kids or anything, that there's literally a brain change. So the first thing for any family member dealing with this, whether it's children dealing with parents or parents dealing with children or husband or wife, is to understand what it is. And so this is the stuff, and we'll come back to some other things, but the first thing is to understand that it's a healthcare issue. This is not about choice. This is not about the fact that Rich woke up one day and said, I'm just going to party my head off until I get addicted. I don't even care about my kids. I don't even care what happens. I'm just going to go at this like a madman. That is not how this goes down. It may look like that at first, right? It may look like a bunch of fun, and it may look like, and to tell you the truth, there were fun things, right? So it's not like, I say it all the time that if, you know, getting high was like getting tasered, I probably wouldn't have gone back the second time. So I'm not up here telling you that it was horrible right from the jump, but I'm telling you, it gets horrible relatively quick, and it goes from a choice and a fun time and a party to literally compulsive use. You can't quit thinking about it. It's like if I was holding your head underwater, the only thing that you would want to do is what? Get a breath. I just need to take a breath. I just need to take a breath. I just need to take a breath. That's what this is like. And to have the kids understand that reality would be part of it. To have the kids understand this is what mom's going through, this is what dad's going through. To have parents understand this is what the kids are going through, and to not make an excuse for that, but to have a realistic view on it. I think I have the brain stuff here. So let's see. So this is the picture. And if Lynn's, and I, you know, I've gone, Lynn is literally lives in about the furthest place you could north and still be in the United States of America. Like Canada is right across the river, which is pretty cool. And I went there and there was one plane in and one plane out. I went there to give a speech and I thought I was gonna have to live there for the rest of my life because the plane broke down. And I started saying a lot. So this is what it looks like, all right? This is what it looks like in terms of the brain change. And I know a lot of you have seen this, and we talk about this every week, and people say, Rich, you keep saying the same thing. there's nothing more important than this. There's nothing more important than understanding that if the person has crossed the line into addiction, it has nothing to do with a rational choice. So these kids that Lynn talking about need to understand that mom is caught up in that compulsive use. So the example would be if, so let's say Meg didn't eat for 7 days. So 7 days go by, she hasn't eaten a thing, and I pull this chair over and I put it right here and I put a pizza on it, a large pizza. And I say to Meg, if you wait 15 minutes and don't eat that pizza, I'll give you $10,000. Now, the rational thing is to do what? To wait 15 minutes and get your $10,000. But if you haven't eaten for 7 days, guys, you are going to get up like basically as soon as I walk, actually probably tackle me when I'm walking across. It becomes a matter of survival. And that's the same thing that happens with substance use. It becomes, in that experience, it happens in the same part of the brain that drives you to eat when you're hungry. And so you think of it the same way. Your brain tells you it's the same exact process.
And is that 24/7 basically?
So you're either using or trying to find ways to get more, or you're trying to figure out how to cover up for the fact that you were just using. It's a 24-hour job. Now you're doing other things. Don't get me wrong. You're not sitting in your room just sitting there like thinking about it. You're doing other things. It's sort of it's background music. It's background music. And also remember, like, different drugs are going to hit you different ways. I'm going to tell you right now, the thing that doesn't get talked about enough is alcohol. I'll be perfectly honest with you that alcohol has gotten lost in the shuffle because of the opioid crisis. But if you really want to dig down into the most insidious thing that we deal with here at Favor Greenville, hands down, it's alcohol. Because it kills people slowly but surely over time. Yes.
Why do you think that we legalize this?
Why we legalize alcohol?
Yeah.
Because it didn't work. There was more alcohol consumed during Prohibition than there was without it. So it just doesn't work.
So we've done a bad thing in society of not educating people?
We've done a bad thing in society of using the word alcoholic and labeling people as an alcoholic and not giving people room to just talk about their alcohol use. So the only thing that you can do in the world is go out, drink, do your thing, go to happy hour, and just, and don't say anything. Doctors won't ask you questions. No one will ask you questions. Your HR department will not say anything. Shh, don't talk about it. Every time we go to the networking event, the sales executives get hammered. Shh, don't talk about it. You don't, until what? Until the person hits bottom and declares that he's an alcoholic. At which point in time you tell them, don't ever drink again. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that, it's not a matter of whether it should be legal or not. It's a matter of there's never been an issue in the history of America that's been more mismanaged from a professional standpoint than substance use disorder. Yes.
And when you say doctors say don't talk about it, I think that's one of the hard things too, because you have doctors that you might go to looking for help, but it's a disaster. Mm-hmm. Finding the right doctor who has the experience with addictions, with whatever,
yes,
to be able to help that patient, that's not an easy thing.
So that's starting to change. I will go on a record and tell you that one of the most hopeful things that I've been exposed to is what we're doing at the med school, what Favor Greenville's doing at the med school with giving people an opportunity, giving med students an opportunity to become recovery coaches. And then also some of the stuff that you hear going on now, it's unfortunate that it took the opioid crisis to kind of kick some of this in other places, but I've seen a lot more receptivity to talking about this. We have to change that. And part of it also is remember, doctors were told that there's super secret knowledge, that a person has to go off to this place to get this super secret knowledge. We call them rehabs. And they got to go there and stuff. And that was the way, it was never promoted to be addressed. It was never a thing. But if you got to a point, Gay, where people were talking about it, and the questions were not like, are you an alcoholic or are you not an alcoholic? They were more along the lines of similar to how you would talk about a diet or similar to how you would talk about smoking or something. What you would see is people would start talking about it earlier and But right now what happens is you just go at it, man. And the thing about alcohol is it just, if you've known anybody who's drank like long term, you know, and they get to their 60s, it'll take root, man. And when it hits a person physically, they go downhill and all these medical complications start to pile up on them. So the process of getting a person to understand this and getting family members to understand what's going on. And when it's alcohol, it's impossible to escape the temptations too. You're going to get a question after work, like, hey, let's go to happy hour. Nobody's going to say, hey, let's go to the crack house for happy hour. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. You're not going to see it at the grocery store. So you're going to have to manage the heck out of the alcohol end if that happens to be what you're dealing with. For happy hour, right? That's just not a common conversation. All right. So how do you know whether or not it's an issue? How do you know whether or not it's crossed the line? This is as close as you can get to an X-ray. Remember, we don't take a picture of people's brains. We should. We just, for whatever, yes.
Sorry for interrupting. You told us, I think, before, but is this a PET scan?
This is a PET scan.
PET scan.
Yes. But we don't routinely do this. I've never had this done to me. I've never had nobody ever showed me a picture and said, look, Rich, this is what you're dealing with. Like you got a broken leg. It's like, here it is. Let's put a cast on it. It's not like that. You got high blood pressure. Here are your numbers. It's not like that. It's basically come in and talk to me. And after you talk to me, I will review your symptoms. And based on a cluster of symptoms, I will do the best I can to tell you, I think, whether or not you're addicted. And the problem is that these symptoms can mimic a lot of other things. Mental health is a very common occurrence where certain things in mental health will look like it's an addiction issue, and the person can really write this off. They can write these symptoms off. So if they come in and they talk to me and I go through it and I say, well, you're having interpersonal issues. You reported that your mom was angry at you. You know, they're going to think, well, that's not my problem. That's because she's over the top, right? You start to say, well, we're having problems at work. You said you're having problems at work. You've been coming in late and stuff. And well, they're just, you give this other explanation. Well, they're just out of their mind that we got to be there at that time. And I get the job done anyway. So you rationalize it away. You talk it away. And this also makes it very difficult when we were talking about denial earlier. It makes it very difficult for the person to do what they need to do and accept it because this is pretty inexact. Now, there are certain substances, or how do I want to say this? There are certain situations where things get so bad, it's painfully obvious to everybody, and people don't even question whether or not they have a problem. I want to go on the record and tell you that. That does happen. But if you're trying to intervene early, this is going to be part of the struggle. And so tolerance means more and more to get the same effect. Withdrawal is when you don't have the substance, you're sick. Craving, preoccupation, you think about it all the time. We talked about that earlier. Can't control. I was going to go out and have 4 drinks. I was just going to drink a couple beers after work, and I was out all night. I drank all night, that kind of thing. Can't cut back. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, but you can't stick to that. Interpersonal issues. People are mad at you. Avoid non-using activities. You only want to go to the party where there's alcohol and drugs. Great deal of time, it becomes a full-time job. Use despite physical or psychological dangers. You've been told you have, your liver, you have problems with your liver, but you keep drinking anyway. Use in physically hazardous situations, that would be drinking and driving repetitively. That would be an example. And enroll failure, you don't go to work, you don't go to school. If you have 6 of those criteria in a 12-month period, if there's a pattern, then you meet criteria for addiction. It's not called addiction, it's called substance use disorder severe. Put whatever the substance is at the beginning. Now, if you're like me, you're an overachiever and you get all 11. The only exam I ever got 100% on, right? But it's really tough if it's marginal. And what do I mean by marginal? If the person's functioning, right? If they're doing what they need to do, if there's no obvious stuff going on, sometimes it's really difficult to get them to see this. Questions or thoughts about this part?
Rich,
Yes, sir.
question about the PET scan we looked at a minute ago. Is it relatively set science that that's accurate? Is there debate in the medical community or the professional community relative to normal, relative to that shot?
So there is debate. there is debate, and it's a growing debate around there seems to be an acceptance that something's happens to the brain, but the question is, how do they frame this up and how they explain it? So one way is dopamine floods the brain so much that the brain has to back off dopamine. The second way is this is being framed up more like a learning disorder, kind of like you're born with it, sort of. And it's an inability to see cause and effect, but it looks the same. Like there's basically the dopamine is still the main neurotransmitter involved. But the difference is one is a craving driven issue, right? I don't have dopamine, so I'm constantly trying to find dopamine. I'm constantly trying to put more in my body. The second is a learning issue where I can't understand that using drugs leads to these consequences. Kind of like dyslexia, where you can't read the words the right way. They frame it up like that. That's part of the debate as well. The biggest debate, though, is the fact that this is overplayed. And what I mean by that is that that substance use disorder actually falls on a spectrum, but we treat everybody automatically like this. So that's the secondary part of it. First of all, how do we explain the brain change? That's one consideration. The second consideration is, does everybody who's in rehab, for example, did they actually all have their brain changed? You get that part? And that is open to much debate because we don't do this.
That's the second half of the question is, if it is set science, if it's recognized as set science, why don't we do this all the time?
So we don't do this because insurance companies don't pay to help people with addiction. That's why we don't do this. And we don't know for sure because there's never been any real research done. So there's never been any money put into anything other than, a little cursory stuff here and there. You guys know that only 10% of people with an addiction issue ever get any kind of help, right? As we said earlier, it's not addressed in the medical system. It's not addressed in any kind of routine way. So think of it as an issue that's been that society has allowed to be completely ignored for the most part. And so you really don't know. Whereas right now somebody is inventing or trying to invent some kind of new cancer drug. With addiction, they're just saying, let's do a little bit more of the same. Let's build some more buildings and put people in them. You know what I mean? Like once we get into that, I think what you're going to find is that this is wide variety of issues. You're going to find that there's so many factors involved with any individual addiction issue. So many factors. There is no such thing as a garden variety drug addict or a garden. And so the deal is, what does an individual person need? You're going to find some things, guys, where it's also going to involve comorbid or co-occurring physical health issues and co-occurring nutritional issues and things like that are going to start to come up. You get this? It's so incredibly simplistic the way that we have approached this as a society. It actually blows my mind if you think about it. Don't do anything. Do not do anything until they hit bottom, and then put them in a rehab and make them do 12-step meetings, period. Wow. There's no nuance or any kind of individuality in that process. And I'm not banging 12-step meetings, guys. I got recovery through 12-step meetings. Do you get it? I am dyed in the wool with that. But what worked for Rich Jones is not going to work for the 16-year-old pot smoker, right? Or even the 18-year-old on opioids. It's going to have to become. The problem is, what do family members do in the meantime until we get there? Because you can't go home tonight and say to your loved one, it's an individualized issue. Because your loved one's going to say, yeah, my individual approach goes like this. Marijuana on Monday, cocaine on Tuesday, Wednesdays are opioid days, right? It's going to be so you can't, what we do is we paint with a really broad brush, guys, and we paint with the most conservative approach. Now, and I totally support that. I totally get it. It's the best we can offer right now. But what you're going to find in the future is that there's a lot of different factors involved and probably a lot of different ways to attack this that aren't currently part of the equation. Johns Hopkins is doing psychedelic research. I don't know. Are you guys aware of that? So psychedelic research, it's what used to be called magic mushrooms. All right. Obviously, you're not taking magic mushrooms and running around the woods in a loincloth with glow sticks. You're at Johns Hopkins, and it's like very controlled. And they're finding that that is working for intractable alcoholism and depression. And the person doesn't even necessarily, they know they're taking psilocybin, but it's delivered in a pill, right? So it feels very westernized in terms of the medicine. That's something you would have never heard of. I mean, they tried to do that in the 60s, and Timothy Leary got a hold of it, and it was a disaster. But you would have never saw that conversation. Medication-assisted treatment for opioids is much more common than I ever thought I would see. Like even 10 years ago, it was out of hand rejected. So you can see that this is moving. Probably the biggest step will be whenever it moves more to what you'll find is that the default setting will be community-based services. You'll start to hear less and less about re-ups and more about increased support in the community. And we hope that recovery coaches are part of that. And people can say, well, that's why you're pushing it, Rich. That's not why I'm pushing it. It makes more sense. You know, if I could put a recovery coach with one of your loved ones for a year versus you sending them somewhere for 30 days, what would you prefer, right? So those kind of things, hopefully you see. Any questions about the criteria? Any questions online about the criteria? Any other questions, Elizabeth? All right, so what do we do? What do you do? People were asking, you know, if it's marijuana or whatever the substance is, what do we do about it? So the first thing is you find out what it is. This is also related to Lynn's question on how do you help the kids. Make sure that everyone involved and everyone that loves the person knows exactly what we're dealing with and is speaking the same language or starts to work through their differences of opinion. So mom thinks it's just boys will be boys. Dad thinks this is a huge problem. We got to do something about it. You got to start coming to some kind of an agreement around what are we dealing with, right? Now, here's what's interesting. That will be the case when it first starts. Like when you first start becoming aware of it, you'll have to have those conversations. You will also have to have those conversations if a relapse is involved, right? Because a lot of times you can look at a relapse two different ways. Some people will say this is the end of the world, kick him out of the house. Other people will say it's no big deal. You've got to constantly say, what are we dealing with here? How severe is this? And do we agree on that part of the equation? So I'll stop there for a minute. Everyone get this part? Does anyone have any questions or any advice they might need on the first step around what is it? What do we do? Or excuse me, what is it? What do we call this? How serious is it? Anybody have any other questions or anything that I can help with in that area? All right, so the second, and this you guys are gonna be like, well, that's just genius, Rich. The second question is does your loved one, what do they think about it? What does the person that you're worried about actually think about this? Do they want help? Are they asking? Are they aware? You know, is this a matter of you guys want it more than they do, or where are they at in the process? And here's what's interesting. A lot of times, family members, not a lot of times, but on occasion, family members will become aware of an issue and they'll start to get concerned and they won't even actually talk to the person about it. This happens a lot around a relapse. After the person's been okay for a while, something will happen or the family members will be observing things. And they'll kind of be like, do you see what I see? Yeah, like it smells like alcohol, but they won't say anything. And then when you do say something, you find out the person was actually concerned and they were concerned that they were heading the wrong way. So it was easier than the family thought. So part of it is, have you actually talked to your loved one about it? Do they know you're here tonight? And do they know that you're as concerned about this as you are? You get that? You get that idea? Can you start there with this conversation on like, George, we're worried. Julie, we're worried. Whatever it is. Are you using again? What's going down? And the sooner you have those type of conversations and you talk about like, do you want help or do you want to do anything about this, the better. Now let's stop for a minute and talk about parameters and ways to have those conversations. Anybody have any thoughts or suggestions on how to have those conversations? How about how not to have those conversations? Okay, don't do this. Hey, pothead, can I talk to you? Right? That was a joke. A little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. You can't come at this with a confrontational attitude. If you come at this with a confrontational attitude, no matter how how much the history has sucked, or no matter how much baggage there is, if you're going to have this conversation, you got to come at it from what? A place of being calm. You have to come at it from a place of, let me convey my point and let me listen to their point. What you're trying to do is get a sense on where your loved one's at in this process. You're not trying at this point to blow them out of the water or confront it like it's an intervention. You guys get the difference? So how do you do that? How do you do that? There are different ways to get this done. I mean, some people will do it just in a one-on-one conversation. We recommend that if you have 2 or 3 people there that also are concerned, like if you're able to get a team together and you can have a collective conversation, say, listen, Rich, we're a little worried about this. You're not going to meetings. You're not doing anything that you're supposed to be doing, anything that they told us you were going to be doing when you left rehab. Can we talk about it? The more people you have involved, the better. And it doesn't have to be an intervention. This isn't an intervention. It's literally a conversation. The rules are, you want to avoid, though, the debate and the argument. You want to make sure the person knows you're not here to, hey, say something at the beginning, front load the conversation with something like, I'm not here to try to get you to do anything. I'm not even here to like tell you, whether you're wrong or whether you're right. I literally just want to ask you a couple questions because I don't know. We're aware that something's going down, and then you give a couple examples, what's happening, and then you let the person talk, and maybe you just let them talk, and then that's all there is to it. But at some point in time, you got to start talking about ever heard the term the elephant in the room? You got to start talking about the elephant in the room, and remember, the elephant in the room can be the fact that you've never talked about the addiction, or it could be the fact that they've been in recovery and they've relapsed. The in recovery and they've relapsed thing is an interesting dynamic. A lot of times parents and spouses and stuff will hold off in saying anything because why do you think, and when you ask them, there's always a common reason. Why do you think that they hold off? If you've ever held off, why have you held off?
I didn't want to know.
That, I don't really want to know too much information almost. That's an interesting one. That's a really good point. Nobody else has said that. It's almost like too painful to find out.
At first,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. The other thing you'll hear is, I'm afraid to like accuse them of this. It'll get angry. It'll be a blow up and it'll make it worse. There's an idea that if I bring this up, it's going to get the person off track. But that's a really interesting idea around, I don't want to know, huh?
Not at first.
Well, that's why colleges exist, right?
Send them away.
I mean, colleges exist so parents can send their kids away from 18 to 22 and they don't have to know. There is a lot to that statement I just made. I mean, everybody, that's not why they're not, that's not the reason, Richard. They're there for higher education. Okay. That's why I majored in 7 different things in my 6-year stint at my 4-year college, right? All right. And then also the team, who cares, who else needs to be there? Remember, we've talked about it's so much better if there's a couple people talking to this person about this issue. I can really manipulate one person. I can tell you what you want to hear, or I can but if you get 2, it's a little harder. If you get 3 people saying the same thing to me, now, that's, if enough people tell you you're a horse, you're going to get a saddle at some point. There's too much agreement that this is an issue, whereas be careful one-on-one with these conversations. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you got to go into it with your eyes wide open and maybe, have less expectations. How many people would you want to have? I don't think you need to have 8 or anything. I think if you have 3 people or 4 people, if you got mom, dad, a sibling maybe, or a friend, grandma, whatever it might be, people who are important to the person. And then, of course, before you start the conversation, make sure you all agree. And here's the thing. The term being on the same page is a little misleading. So, what do we mean by be on the same page? Be on the same page doesn't mean that mom and dad agree on everything about this issue. Not at all. That's not even realistic to say at all. It means during the high impact moments that mom and dad are going to present as if they agree on everything. You get it? You could be in the back room totally at each other's throat about the fact that this is a big deal or not. But when you walk out to talk to Johnny, you got to be saying the same thing at that point in time. Being on the same page doesn't mean that you agree. It means that you're going to present the same information to the person for obvious reasons. If I tell Joey that he can't go out this weekend because it's an at-risk situation and they told us you should stay away from people, places, and things. If I tell him no and then mom says yes, right? Those are the problems. Those are the problems. The other thing, the other area around the real kind of classic boundaries, like I just described, which the rule sounding stuff, there is a need to kind of be in agreement around how you feel about the behavior and how you talk about the behavior in terms of its danger, in terms of your concern, in terms of its severity. Marijuana is just a really good example. This isn't only about marijuana, though. It could be about anything. If it's heroin or some kind of opioid or maybe methamphetamine, that's going to be easy for everybody to agree on, typically. Typically, everybody's going to agree that this is a big problem. If it's alcohol and marijuana, what happens is that you have the rules that you have to agree on, but you also have to agree on the vibe around it or the severity of it. You know what I mean? And so what if you were a person that back in the day, and I know none of y'all would have done this, but back in the day, I used to like a little bit of the hippie lettuce. I used to enjoy the devil's cabbage. Can't believe nobody's laughing about that. Those terms are hilarious. I did not make those terms up, but they are so funny. Hippie lettuce and devil's cabbage. You know, so what if you had a history? What if you had a little bit of fun whenever how does that impact the way that you're talking to the person, and how do you want to handle that? These are all things that you want to work out, and you know, you don't have to tell lies about that, and you don't have to put on this thing where it's something that you don't think it is, right? You just have to be aware of where you're coming off and what messages you're sending, and if the message in the house is this is not okay, if that's the message in the house, and you've agreed that that's where you're at with it, you got to make sure you can follow through on it and that you're carrying that with you as you're going into these conversations. You have what you're going to say to the person, and then you have also how you're going to act at other times too, right? So you can do everything right in the family meeting, say all the right things and stuff, and then you have to figure out how does that translate in terms of your behavior. So I'm going to give you an example that comes up quite a bit. Alcohol. Again, alcohol, super common. Majority of people who drink aren't alcoholics, okay? So they can have a drink at dinner. They can have a drink around the house at Christmas. They can have a drink at Thanksgiving. But if you're trying to make sure that your loved one doesn't drink, okay, the message around not doing that, the message you can send by not doing that is relatively powerful early on for that person's recovery. Now, people always say, Rich, can we drink or not? So-and-so's coming back from rehab. I don't ever tell people they can't drink. What I can tell you is that you can take actions that back up your words that the person will notice. It's not your fault if they don't make it. You guys get what I'm saying? I'm not saying that this is on you. It's on them for their recovery. But a lot of times in early recovery, you'll see people take those type of steps. You'll see family members take those type of steps. You know, I was 30 years old, 29, 30 years old when I entered into recovery. It was, for me, with opioid use disorder severe, but way before that, alcohol use disorder severe. I mean, I was just always drinking. It's just what you do in my family. You drink. And so when I got into recovery, my mom, and I was prepared to not go to events. Do you get where I did not expect her to do anything because I didn't know that my family could have an event without alcohol there. I literally thought it was like a constitutional law that alcohol had to be there. And so when she didn't have alcohol at these events, I don't ever remember actually talking to her about it, but I remember thinking like, damn, they're all serious about this, because part of it also was that they were starting to tighten me up and letting me know that you know what I mean? Like when she did that, that sent a message to me about she's serious about this. You know, and I'll never forget when she asked, it was probably 18 months later, she could have had alcohol there way before this. I'll never forget though, when she said, there's going to be alcohol at this event. Are you okay with that? Because if you're not, I won't have it. And it just stands out to me. It just took, and what is it about that? Did that make or break my recovery? No, but it sent a very clear message on how my mom felt about me drinking. You get it? Like it was very clear that her actions were going to back up her words.
How did she figure out, okay, we're nothing.
What's that?
How did she get to the point where she could say, okay, we're gonna have alcohol? I mean,
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So the question is like, how did she finally shift, right?
Yeah.
I think it had a lot to do with time, honestly. I don't think there was any rhyme or reason to it. Between me and you, she could have said that a lot earlier and I would have been okay. I just think that over time, I feel like what happened in my case, and I was doing a lot of meetings, I was actively engaged in recovery, and I feel like she was probably like, he's okay. But there was no conversation, and there doesn't seem to be any necessarily method to the madness on how long to wait. And I'm not saying that has to be part of it. But what I am saying is that you can take opportunities if alcohol was an issue for the person, especially, right? So for me, remember, I told you my background, alcohol was, you could look at my story and say I was addicted to opioids. Absolutely. Opioids drove me to my knees in like 18 months. Alcohol, though, was there from like 15 on. Always present. So in my case, this was something that she had, you know what I mean? It was very pronounced. That's what I'm kind of suggesting. If it's very pronounced, maybe that's something. Yes.
And my son has said he's had problems with alcohol and with cocaine and that, but he has said alcohol makes him want to do drugs.
And a lot of people will talk about that. So one thing leads to another, absolutely. So alcohol gets inhibitions down and sets it off. And again, we don't tell people what to do with it. But if somebody was like, okay, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, you have to tell me, I'd say, don't do it. I'd say simply, do not do it. Wait a while, that kind of thing. But you get the general idea on how it backs it up. All right. So any other thoughts or questions on this part? On putting the team together, having the conversation, all that kind of stuff.
I just had one. I was just gonna say, I'd recommend not talking to them when they're high or using.
Abso-freaking-lutely. Like, so do not try to do this if the person is under the influence. Do not try to do this. What other questions? Yes.
What if you and your significant other are not on the same page in terms of a backslide, for instance?
Yeah, very good question. So what if there was a slip and you're not on the same page? So I think that's where something like maybe coming to this group or getting a chance to talk to one of the coaches, maybe in a one-on-one meeting or two people with the coach kind of meeting. We're coming here and just hearing it out and trying to get a third party's information involved can sometimes be helpful. It's very common. What you're describing right there is exceedingly common. Remember, people want this to be over. And I'm telling you, like, the most diabolical part about addiction is how it's just always there. It's exhausting because it's just always there. And people want it to be over. So what will happen is if there's a lapse, sometimes people will be like, we don't really need to do anything about this because if we got to do something about it, now we're acknowledging it's a problem again. I'm just done with this. I'm just tired of this. And it's okay for people to say that. That's how they work through it and they figure out where they need to go with it and what they need to do. But there's a lot of folks that were like, I'm sure we need to do this. Then the person got better for a while and slips up, and then all of a sudden that resolve is gone. So get them to a meeting like this or get them to talk to somebody where they can get some more perspective.
Rich,
yes.
one of the things that you said last week that resonated with me was there is no finish line. If you remember that.
Yeah, there is no finish line in the sense. So is my mom worried tonight that I'm going to get high? No, not at all. You know, when I moved here 7 years ago, I've told you, she was extremely concerned. She got me on the phone and said, my understanding is when you move outside of the area and you get outside of you don't have a home group. And, you know, are you like doing recovery, Rich? And I'm like, does my mom even know what I do for like does she think I'm an accountant or something? Like, what the hell is this question? You know? And so, but you know, that was in a very specific way. It was about when people move from one location to another. She had been told that that's risk. So my point with this is that for her, like, it's not something that's on her mind now. And for most people, they will tell you after 5 years, they feel like basically that's statistically relapse rates go way down. And in 5 years, if there was a finish line, it would be 5 years. You get that part? People are kind of holding their breath a lot with this disease. They're holding their breath. And that's the thing that we got to work on. That's the thing where if you have agreement around how to handle it, if you have an ongoing plan, if you have this commitment to take care of yourself and get therapy, or work on your own stress no matter what, maybe it can take care of the fact that there's no finish line. Because again, that is the hardest part of this. Did somebody else have, yes?
I'm going back to the brain when you were showing the difference in it.
Yep.
And you've said in the past 90 days for their start to be
Yeah.
changed. What does that actually mean from the addicted person?
So, well, if you look there, I don't have the slides here, but if you look at the slide I showed you that had the depletion of dopamine, there's a reverse slide where it's like, addicted, 10 days, 20 days, 100 days, you can see that it's starting to come back. So basically it means that you're able to get back to this point where you don't need to be putting something in your body every day to experience pleasure and contentment. It doesn't mean that you're fixed. It means that you're probably back to a point where you're far enough away from the drug that you can experience a normal day. But the theory is before that, you're still depleted and you're still vulnerable to that compulsive seeking and those really bad days. But I will tell you, there's no question that to this day, I have got to manage my stress and anxiety and feelings of discontentment. And I have tapes in my head around my early recovery that go like, you can get through this. This just is what it is. You don't have to get high. It's like, it's there all the time now. Do you get it? It's not like you get into recovery and all of a sudden life is just fantastic. And you don't feel that stuff. You still feel all that creepy stuff that led to getting high. But what you have is you have all these other things that give you that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. The problem is it becomes a warped sense of how reality should be for us. Maybe this goes back to your original question around the theory of this. As you become addicted, you develop a warped sense of how the world should be. And it goes something like this. I do not have to experience bad feelings. I do not have to experience stress. I do not have to experience worry. I do not have to experience boredom. I know what will fix that. Boom. You get it? And that you still have to manage. And I would make an argument that we all have to manage that our whole entire life. It's just with other people, maybe it manifests itself in different ways. For those of us who became addicted, we have to be exceedingly careful we don't go to the substance. But how many people in here, or people you hear it all the time, take the edge off? Just got to take the edge off. Just got to calm. And for most people, that's no big deal. But if I go take the edge off, to this day, I'm convinced if I go take the edge off, I take the edge off once, I take the edge off twice, I'd be back in a doctor's office talking about my neck hurting. Do you get where I'm coming from? And I would be back there, and then let me get an opioid in me for recreational purposes. Let me get one. I'm telling you, I wouldn't even start with one. You know what I mean? Like I would go in it. That's the difference. That's the difference. But the good news is that you really learn how to cope and deal with that. It's not hard. It's just there. Does that make sense? It is not a burden in my life, but it is there. And that's where your loved one need to be involved in recovery. That's why you hear things like it's a lifelong process. And that doesn't mean people go to meetings their whole entire life, but they do something typically to keep their head in the game. That's when my mom was worried what I was doing. So she suggested that I take up yoga, which I didn't. All right. Now I do want to show you one little technique that happens in the intervention model that we use. I believe that family members can have this conversation without an intervention. So you could literally draw this for your loved one, or you could talk to them about it. But in your mind, this is how you want to conceive it. Here's what typically happens in any given family when one person is dealing with addiction. The person who's dealing with addiction becomes the focus of everyone's attention and anger and frustration and rescuing and attention. That's all you talk about. What's going on with Joe? What's going on with Joe? What's going on with Joe? What's going on with, it's either sister's angry at Joe or mom's rescuing Joe or dad's trying to kick Joe out, but it's us against them. Okay? The idea would be, can you as a family try to get your loved one to understand that we're all in this together? Okay, that we are all in this together. Sometimes what you'll see is you'll see this graph and the person's name will be here and addiction will be in the middle, and it's all of us against addiction. You're trying to get this to feel like a team effort. Now, what can you do to get this done? What kind of things can you do to get that part done? Well, first of all, you got to get more than one person involved, right? The second thing is, and I feel like this is, you guys are already halfway here because you're here tonight. When I did interventions, so we don't really do interventions here anymore. We do family meetings. We just can't handle interventions. They're too staff intensive. But I probably have done 200 plus interventions. And when I would do these, what we would say is that we would tell the person that every other person in the family will also be working on their recovery. You get it? That it isn't about you going to AA meetings only. It's you going to AA meetings, but dad's going to Al-Anon. Mom's going to see a therapist. Oh, and by the way, your sister likes smoking the hooch, so she's going with you to the meeting. You follow me? Like you take the focus off the person and you say, we're in this together, okay? And when we would do this, so picture how this would go down. So it would be, hey, Rich, can you do an intervention? Yeah, but it was like out of the area and it was always coming out. It was relatively expensive, whatever it was, $5,000. You know, so people are paying you for it, and you tell them right off the jump, they sign a contract that says they will do this. And they paid you, so they're not going to back out. So this was incredibly powerful. And I believe this is why I never had an intervention that didn't work. I never did not have a successful intervention. I had interventions that didn't wind up in rehab. I had interventions that wound up at like IOP level instead, but the person eventually went no matter what. And I believe it was because of this. Now, you can do this without a professional involved. You can have the conversation that says, and you're already doing it because all you have to do is add to, hey, and listen, I'm not saying this is just you. I'm going to this damn Monday night meeting every week. You should hear this idiot up there. This is how committed I am to, you know, like you are already doing it. But is there anybody else that you would need to get involved? Is there a key person? Here's what it's like. So people lament the fact of like young people pulling away from church. People, like you'll hear this a lot. Like I'm a sociologist, you'll hear people talk about this all the time. Why aren't people? And one of the main reasons why kids don't go to church, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, is that the dads don't go to church. It becomes like a burden of the moms, okay? Now, if you want your kids to go to church, is it going to work better if the dad goes to church or if he doesn't? You get where I'm? This is the same type of an idea. If dad isn't coming to this meeting and wants the kid to come to go take care of himself, I challenge that. If your loved one's out there, tell them I said this. Come to this meeting and start to work on this information, you know, and then go back and present the fact that we are in this together. We're working on this together. Or maybe there's somebody else that needs to be involved. Maybe it's an older person who's married and his wife needs to get here. I'm not saying it's always mom and dad, but who else has any influence? And you start to say things like, we're all going to take care of ourselves. It becomes kind of like what we do. We're going to take care of ourselves, and we're going to take care of ourselves no matter what. And here's the thing. This doesn't go away. This is an ongoing issue, and it is something, and understand it's going to be there whether you do this group or not, right? It isn't going to go away. You have to make a fundamental decision on how you're going to approach this issue. None of us wanted this. I mean, I love what I do, but I don't want to sit here and tell you that I'm glad that I became addicted and went through all that stuff. You get this? We are all in a club that we somewhat joined without our consent, right? I guess I gave consent, y'all didn't. You were brought into it. But so the idea would be it's there, it's going to be there, it's not going to go away, you can't wish it away. So why not throw all in on this type of stuff? And again, if it's not favor groups, it could be other types of groups. If it's not even a group, it could be individual therapy. But I would make sure that your loved one knew this. And I would have conversations about it. And I would say things like, hey, we're all on the same team, man. We're tired of fighting you on this. We're not here to fight you anymore on it. We're not down with it. It is not acceptable. We're not okay with it, you know, with you acting like this or doing this. But I do want you to know, like, we believe that we need help as much as you need help. Now, what gets in the way of that? Why do people not do that? Because for the most part, a lot of people don't believe what I just said. Because it's what? Addiction is an individual disease and Rich has it, therefore Rich should go take care of it. You have to suspend judgment and step back and say, no, this is something that we all can benefit from. We can all go get recovery. We can all go get education. We can all get information. I don't know how many people in here have ever tried therapy, like going and seeing a therapist and sitting there and talking. Therapy is good, man. Like, it's actually, like, they talk, like, unless you've gone to the wrong therapist, but for the most part, you should be doing a lot of the talking and you should be like the center of attention. That in and of itself is pretty cool, right? Because where does that really happen? Where else in your life? What's that?
Only there.
Only there. I'm telling you, like, where else do you go where the only question is, hey, how's it going? Tell me about you. Everything else is what? Give me, help me, give me. You know, that kind of, so therapy can be incredibly helpful. Finding a mentor, maybe sometimes a mentor through church, or a coach here at Favor, or a sponsor through Allen, somebody to talk to one-on-one. I wanted to I blew you off your question. What was your question? I'll get you next, sir. It was a while ago.
I did where you said to get people involved on
Yeah.
the team. So I kind of did that. My son's got drug addiction, and I found out it's going on at his place of work with coworkers and management. So since I got narcotics involved a month ago, so they're watching the restaurant and they've been in the news a lot. So an officer said, this is a good time to call corporate. Well, you call corporate, you just get these people answering the phones, taking your complaint.
Oh,
So
wow.
I called, I left my complaint. Within 20 minutes, my phone was blown up by my son, who knew what I complained about. And then corporate calls me back, and they don't really want to do anything about it.
No, they probably, they would prefer that not
I think
even
they
to
want
be.
to, though, because they're in the news so much lately right now. But I try to get them on board because it's not only my son, but employees and management.
Because you found it out in the process of going through this.
In my son's phone, it's in my name, so
Yeah.
I got pictures, videos, text, so I got like the whole restaurant.
So this is, well, let's talk about that.
So do I keep pushing corporate? Now corporate's calling me a lot. I'm not answering the phone because I'm mad right now.
Yeah.
Because you didn't investigate, you didn't talk to me. You just merely called that restaurant, told the manager, who told my son.
So let's talk about this, because what you have is you have two different things. And understand that whenever addiction is involved, if you believe this, okay, if you believe that this does happen to some people, you will get to a point where you can't affect change via the team. You can only affect change via like external control. And external control is typically like legal issues and pressing charges whenever your loved one takes your car without permission, pressing charges whenever he steals. You get where I'm coming from? So understand that sometimes this approach, and in a situation like that, this approach isn't going to work. If the person, and I will give you, I don't want to like profile people because this isn't fair, but that tends to happen with younger people. Like younger people tend to be more aggressive in the archetype of addiction. What I mean by that is that they're verbally aggressive and they're like, leave me the F alone, and they're obnoxious, and a lot of that has to do with their age to a certain degree. So it's harder to do this with somebody who's aggressive. And then, okay, so what do you do in that situation? That's when you start to get into some of the classic stuff where you say, I am not going to turn my back on anything. And you know, if that means pressing charges, that means pressing charges. People always say, I can't imagine pressing charges against my kid or against my loved one. Understand something, that I have seen so many people get their records expunged. I've seen so many people work through legal charges. There's no, like, a legal charge is not the end of the world for a person's life. And sometimes if the brain issue is so out of control, guys, right? If the brain issue is so out of control that there's no opportunity for reason at all you have is the opportunity to make the call. And I was just talking with a family about this tonight. And I don't want to stand here and act like that's an easy thing to do, but understand sometimes if you're trying to get your arms around the person and you can't, the court system will. That no longer has, it's no one's choice now. They're going to put their arms around them. It typically takes more than you think, though, to do that. I will say this. It typically takes a lot more than you think. Like, you have so many times we're like, well, this is what happened, and I called the police and nothing happened, and it blows my mind. That's not uncommon. It's harder to get arrested than you think.
That's right.
I mean, it's amazingly harder to get arrested than you think. So, were you gonna, yes?
Could you give some background on coaches, favorite coaches?
So favorite,
Who are they? What do they do?
yeah. So favorite coaches, we have recovery coaches and we have family recovery coaches. So family recovery coaches are people who've gone through this. They've had some experience with a loved one, and then they go through a 30-hour training that I do, and they're certified by the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors as family coaches. And they will call you and set up a time. A lot of it happens on the phone. Sometimes it happens face to face. And they talk they talk directly either to the couple or to the family, but it's not a group. It's more like a one-on-one. Tend to get into more of the details of your situation. We also have a call line that's 24 hours, and the cards are on the desk that is also meant to call and get direct advice about your situation. So one of the things that used to happen was I was able to answer a lot of questions. I would have a lot of, the organization was just sort of like taking off, and I was able to like stand around afterward and answer questions and stuff and give people individual attention. I can't do that anymore. I'm traveling for all these different things. We have 3 centers. So these coaches are supervised by me. They are an extension of me, and they answer these questions. And if anybody's had a family coach, they do okay, right? And again, it tends to be very pragmatic advice. Do you guys get this? They're not going to ask you about your relationship with your mom when you were 3 years old. It's not going to be that type. It's going to be like, the house is on fire. How do we help you put it out? You know, we're not going to talk about what to do with the pictures or what color to paint the wall. How do we help you? And it has a lot to do finding resources, what they went through, how they made decisions on what they wanted to do with interventions, those type of things. It's the same principle as somebody who was in addiction helping somebody who's trying to find recovery. The only problem right this second is we have a bit of a waiting list because of just the absolute overwhelming number of people who need a coach, but that call line is available immediately. And the wait is still only like a week. It's not that long. And we're trying to staff up to get to where we need to be. Do you have a question?
Yes.
Who is it?
Cheryl Bandy, she said, do you have to have extended sobriety to relapse, or is just reverting back to drinking?
Yeah, great question. So how do you define a relapse? Is it how long do you have to be in recovery before it's a relapse? Now remember, you have to be in recovery long enough that these symptoms go into remission. And it's not technically a relapse unless the symptoms come back. So it can be a little bit confusing, but it's a lapse or a recurrence, a slip, whatever you think about it. So if I'm in recovery for 6 months and these symptoms kind of like go into remission, actually has to be a year. If she wants an answer in terms of time, it's a year, okay? Because you have to have 12 months of the symptoms in remission. But just because you pick up doesn't mean you're in full-blown relapse. You're not in full-blown relapse unless the criteria come back. You get that? This is very misunderstood. So here's how it goes. I am in opioid use disorder, full sustained remission, okay? Alcohol use disorder, full sustained remission, because these symptoms are gone. You get that? If I go out and drink tonight, it doesn't mean that I've relapsed because these symptoms didn't come back. You get where I'll have interpersonal problems because my wife will try to, she'll probably kill me in my sleep, and I would consider that an interpersonal problem. But other than that, that's only one of the criteria. You get this? So I wouldn't be back in a full-blown relapse until this came back online. Now, why is that important to understand? Getting a person back on track before the symptoms come back is so much easier than after the symptoms come back. Getting a person back on track from a slip is so different than like a 6-month run or a year-long run. You guys, this is why we always are preaching like it doesn't matter, just get back on track, get back on track, get back on track. And we talked about this last week, how hard it is for families to approach it like that because it's so disappointing. But that's really what the idea would be and what the message would be. if you're talking to somebody who just slips up, their brain is not like this. It doesn't get there that quick. It's not like drinking one time makes that happen. You'd have to do it repetitively. There'd have to be other things involved. Now, it's going to happen sooner if you've crossed the line once. This is a common thing in mental health and drug addiction that doesn't get talked about. It's called kindling. And basically what that means is that if the episode is there once, it makes it more likely it could be there twice. It makes it more likely to be there 3 times. So that's why people, you'll see what happens is they just start stacking relapses. Have you known anybody that's like had 13, 14, 10, like that's what's going on. They've progressed, their brain has progressed to a point where you really can't even take a chance with anything at all. And that's why you'll hear people say, if I drink 1 beer, I'm going to wind up. It's not quite like that, but it does go quick. It does absolutely go quick. All right. So we talked about this. And then the other thing would be this idea of a recovery message. And this is the only other part of the team. It's very difficult to remain calm when you're talking about addiction with your loved one. It's very difficult to stay focused on big picture kind of conversations and to try to take the focus off the loved one. Because what you want to do is you want to wring their neck. I can't believe you're doing this to yourself and you're doing it to me. But when you're trying to have a team meeting, what we talk about in terms of recovery messaging is, one, you want to try, it's coming from a place of love. Now, this example has to do with, like, if you're doing like a full-blown intervention, you do a family history, and typically you're able to like identify where this stuff started, and you say stuff like this, look, this has been here in our family way before you. You see the idea, what you're doing here is you're trying to get this away from like, you suck, Rich, go get help, to let us help you, man. We're all in this together. But even if you don't do the history stuff, you can at least say, look, this isn't about confrontation. This isn't about me trying to run your life. I love you too much to watch you self-destruct. Can I get 15 minutes to talk? I love you too much to just act like this isn't happening. Talk about yourself. Try not to talk only about the person's behavior. Be careful if you get into too many facts, because they're going to push back. If you start to offer too many examples, what are they going to do? They're going to tell you how you were wrong about that example. I did not get high last Wednesday. It was Tuesday. Damn it. Get this right. You want to talk more about yourself. Here's how I feel every time you leave and I don't know where you are for 2 days. I can't sleep at night. I'm pacing the floor. If you talk about yourself, it's harder for the person to look at you and say, that's not true. You don't feel that way. Emotions are big. Like, one of the interesting things about substance use disorder, in the general population, about 6% of people will meet lifetime criteria for narcissism or sociopathy, or antisocial personality disorder. About 6%. Among the addicted population, that number is around 18%. So there are people who are narcissistic, and people who lack remorse, and people who have like antisocial personality tendencies do have a higher rate of addiction. But here's the deal. 82% don't. Do you get it? Like, so most people aren't narcissists and sociopaths. Most people care what you think. They do. The whole entire time when I was spun out, man, and doing all the things, I've said this before, I love my mom and I love my wife and I love my kid every step of the way. It was not even like, there was no doubt I would die today for any of them. And that never wavered 1 minute. What happens is when your brain gets like this, all you can think about is, how am I going to get that? So it's almost as if, and I guess in a way, maybe this is worse. It's almost like it's an afterthought, what's going on. It's not like, should I do this to my mom? Should I not do this to my mom? It's just like, you're panicked. I don't know how to explain this other than you're panicked. Like, you're literally in this panic state of trying to get the substance, or trying to set up a situation where you can get the substance. It becomes a full-time job, and that drives people to steal. That drives people to say all the things they say. That drives people to blow off all the opportunities for help. Yes?
So with that in mind, how do you decide when and where to have this family meeting?
Well, so I think you can have it whenever you got the crew together and you think that that they're willing to do it, and you make sure you got them on point. You could do it anytime. There is no perfect time. The sooner the better.
If they show up crazy high.
Well, it's going to be hard to do if they're crazy high. So you'd have to do it. You'd have to try to set it up in a situation where they weren't, right? Like, first thing in the morning, maybe, right? Something like that. At a restaurant, maybe, where they're less likely to flip out. Maybe, and you don't have to go into great detail during this thing. Do you get it? Like, this isn't like bearing your soul and let's talk about everything that's ever happened. This is literally like, hey, we all love you. How are you doing? We're here for you. Even if you did that, that is the complete opposite of what y'all have been told. You guys have been told, not you guys in this room because you come to favor, but people have been told for decades that what you're supposed to do is wash your hands of your loved one and not even give them, literally, you'll hear people say weird stuff like, don't even give them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Which is a weird thing to say. Are there people that you shouldn't have contact with? Yes, there are people you shouldn't have contact with. Who? People who are mean to you, people who want to beat you up, people who are stealing your stuff. Do you get it? Like, if they're taking advantage of you, or they're just like so mean that don't be around them. Do you get it? But otherwise, there's no purpose at all I would get them together and I would just be like, come on, let's go have something to eat. And you'd have to discipline yourself that you weren't going to turn it into a speech. But you get other people there and like, we love you, man. We're thinking about you. Yes.
There's a situation where it's an isolated adult within the house, an adult, and the confrontation is going to lead the adult to leave. Okay, fine. I'm not leaving. I'll be on my own. And now that person killed themselves, they're living with the wrong influence.
So that hasn't happened yet. You're saying that would be a concern, right? Yeah. So that part of it is very, very common. I don't know if you guys can hear this. It's the idea of like, here's what's going to happen if we say something. And I think what you want to do there is that's where you got to like talk that through, and you definitely don't want to go into that until you have an idea on what you would do if that happened. Okay, so what do I mean by that? And I'm not suggesting this is exactly how it would go down. I don't know enough of the details, but the idea would be, we're pretty sure if we say that, here's what's going to happen. He's going to make suicidal threats, or he's going to leave. So you say, okay, what do we do if it's suicidal threats? You call 911 immediately, and you say, my son is threatening to kill himself. They're going to say, well, let's talk to him. And they're going to say, well, he said he's not going to kill himself. And you're like, where can I document that I called you telling you that my son's going to kill himself? That's what you say to the cop then. Where can I document this? The cop leaves, your son says, I'm going to kill myself. You call the police again. And you get it? Like, that's how you deal with suicidal ideation. You call the police, whether you think it's serious or not, because if it's not serious, the person's going to get tired of the police coming. If it is serious, that's the only thing you can do. There is no mobile crisis unit in Greenville. Do you get that? There is no other resource. Now, if you want to talking to him and somehow you felt better about it, I'm not saying like he says it once. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that every time somebody says, I wish I wasn't alive, that we call the police. I don't mean it like that. But if it's a serious kind of threat. The second thing with people leaving, that's in a weird way, a little bit of a harder thing to deal with, because you can't keep them there. They do have to go. You would have to be saying to yourself, can we live with this? And you'd have to talk that all out ahead of time. And how are we going to live through this, not knowing where he is and what he's doing? You can't do anything about that, though. You guys get that part? Like, you're literally choosing whether or not, which one of these uncomfortable situations do we want to deal with? You know what I mean? Let me pick my poison. Is it going to be living with this situation or living with the uncertainty of what's going on? People will typically go there once they feel like they've explored all other options and they've just gotten so tired of the situation. It's not really a first level intervention in most cases. It tends, because it's such a hard thing to do, it tends to happen after you go through some steps. But the advice would be, when you go there, knowing that this is going to happen, you got to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we're ready to go there, because that's the worst thing you can do is say, you got to leave, and then nope, come back in because he's, said something or manipulated the situation, or was serious about it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to everybody? You got it. It's this idea of mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. take the time to make sure that you guys are in agreement on what you're going to do. So when you say to the person, remember, when you set any boundary, the person is always going to react in anger. Agreed? We've talked about this. There is no such thing as saying no without making the other person angry. The idea that you can set a boundary on another human being and they're going to be happy about it, that's actually a psychiatric symptom. It's called, so there's affect appropriate to situation means I just did something that should make that person mad. I told him no, and he's mad. You get that? Like that's, if he's happy about it, we have a bigger problem. You know?
It's also baby steps.
It's also baby steps, but I got to tell you, like wherever you're at in this process, the most important thing is to have clarity in your mind on what you can do and what you can't do, what you can live with and what you can't live with. There's nothing more fundamental than that. If you know yourself well enough to know that I could never live with the fact that I just kicked my son out because all I'm going to do is pace for the next 6 months, then maybe you don't even go there. You keep coming back to this group until you get better at that. You get that? All right. Well, it's 5 after 8. I've kept you guys too long. Listen, I am not going to be here next Monday. I will be in Pennsylvania celebrating Thanksgiving. I will be in the witness protection program in an undisclosed location in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania. So you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Michelle and Carol will be here next week, so come. It'll be an open share if you have any questions for follow-up. If we can get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for those family members brought in this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys, good deal. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I